Martin, you said of the new leadership team that these people are mad, bad and dangerous and they have to go. Are you in any way assuaged by the decision to drop the most unpopular measure, that is the tax cut for Britain's wealthiest earners?
It has a certain symbolic value, but of course it just indicates that they are not completely insane, because they have no chance really of getting this through Parliament. Some very senior Tory MPs, former cabinet ministers, had indicated they would oppose it, and it wouldn't take very much for them to lose. They lose a bit more than 30 votes, and they've had it if they go to the other side. But the problem is, in my view, not with this fine detail, as you say. It's a very small amount, £2 billion or so, in a tax cutting package of about 45 billion. My problem is that the entire strategy is not going to work.
Let's just start with the impacts of the policies as they were announced by the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. Why was the effect of that announcement so dramatic in the UK economy?
Well, it's a very good question, in the way, because we knew what they were going to do before, and the new announcements made on the notorious Friday were really rather small. So why did markets get frightened before? I think there are probably two explanations. First, this symbolic tax cut for the rich just sort of indicated that they were not politically realistic. And people began to wonder, well, can they command a majority in the House? And that is very important for investors. And the other problem that emerged is that their complete indifference to showing any calculations of what it would cost, how they were going to recoup the money they were giving away, and their indifference to the work of the Office for Budget Responsibility. And that started, I think, making investors think these people are not normal, rational Western politicians. They're ideologues, and they're putting themselves in a politically untenable situation. And that makes us think, well, Britain isn't the safe haven we used to think it was.
Now, just talk to me about the global economy, because, of course, the challenges that the global economy faces, we face in Australia too. Do these recent events have consequences beyond the very dramatic scenes that we've seen in the UK?
That's an interesting question. Some of my friends think they might. But so far, I would say it's largely sui generis. It's a special British problem. But of course, it is in the context of global rises in interest rates, a very strong dollar, a immense inflationary pressure, so reductions in real income, the energy shocks we are experiencing, much more severe in Europe because of gas, but everywhere else, the food shocks we are experiencing, the concern about the stability of debt in many countries with higher interest rates and a rising dollar. All this together is making investors very nervous, and they don't expect anything to happen in the near future which will suddenly make this go away.
Kwasi Kwarteng has said, that's the British Chancellor, has said that he's made a decision on the top-end tax cut, but he hasn't said that he's going to change tack on the rest of the tax cuts that were the bigger part of the package. Do they have the authority to go ahead with that larger group of tax cuts?
I think there's a pretty good chance, since tax cuts are popular with Conservatives, that they will be able to get the tax cuts through. But then that raises the problem, because I think the OBR will find that's
the Office of Budget
Responsibility.
Thank you.
Will find in their analysis, which is going to come fairly soon, I think sooner than was expected, that there's no reason to expect growth suddenly to pick up. So with these huge tax cuts, and of course the enormous, supposedly temporary, but who knows, energy package as well, which is going to cost something like 60 billion pounds in 2 years. So it's enormous sums together. They're going to find that there's a budget hole. And how is he going to fill it? Well, basically, they've locked themselves into tax cuts. So as I said already, they're going to have to commit themselves to very tight public spending. They won't, I think, uprate benefits by inflation. So that means the poorest people in the country will suffer very large real income losses. And they already, of course, really are suffering those now. The spending for major public services like health and education will be squeezed. Will they get that through Parliament? In about 2 years before an election, a Conservative Party that is desperately unpopular, the polls say already, well, they might not. And then they would have the problem that they have a yawning budget deficit, which they can't close because they won't want to raise taxes because that's terrible defeat. And they can't get through the spending cuts because nobody will support them. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
So what happens to Liz Truss? I heard one senior British politician say that he didn't come into politics to make people poorer. Is she going to be able to hold the party with her?
Well, that's the really profound question. I hope not, because I think she and Kwasi Kwarteng have proved themselves not capable of doing this job in a sensible, competent, reasonable manner. But of course, they've just got rid of one leader. It's been a very painful. Getting rid of another leader shortly afterwards would be devastating for their reputation. And under their rules, which of course can always be changed, they can't do it in less than a year from the last choice. So if she really clings on and nobody wants to start it up again, she could be around for another year. And then getting rid of her within a year of the election sounds pretty difficult. So I suspect, alas, that they and we are stuck with her, but I wish that were not the case.
Martin Wolf, bumpy times ahead. We'll be following closely. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Great pleasure.